Alrighty, so we've made it through the first 3 chapters of Revelation, and I'll be doing, I was ambitious, and we'll see how far we get. I have my introduction to chapters 4 and 5 right here, and then I have my notes on 4 and 5 here. So this may be one of those that may be broken into 2 parts too, but we'll see. We'll see where the time goes here. I was talking with Kathy driving up and said, well, I can do all this. I think it'd take about an hour and 15 minutes. And she kind of shook her head. And, well, you might want to rethink that one. But to begin with, just for introduction into just world events and all that's happening. I've lived long enough and seen enough major stuff go on that I know it can easily go one way or the other. And it seems like every week there's something else shifting or changing in all that we're doing. One of the articles that came out in the Wall Street Journal several years ago was talking about the famine and that's coming to Africa and just the locust eating all the crops. And even with Samaritan's Purse, whom I'm volunteering to work with, talking about there will come a stage later this year in Africa where they just won't have enough food. And so what do you do when you have massive failures there in crop growth and people are starving? I think we can remember back Somalia, Sudan, other times where people are not doing well by not getting food. And then another Wall Street Journal op-ed article was stating the next war is not going to be fought with tanks and guns and jets. Said the next war is going to be fought with what they termed cyber security. The way it's working now, computers control everything. I mean, I'll just list a few. You could extend this out to whatever you want. You can have your iPhone now or a smartphone, pull up in your driveway and just hit a few buttons and turn all your lights on, and do that. Cars are run by computers. We have everything you need to connect on the internet. I have in this little 2x6 box right now on my phone. You don't even have to have a big laptop. Everything is just moving that direction. So if anybody is able to tap into the electric grids, gas, all that plays into that, they could close it down. So our government is constantly trying, to prevent that from happening. And for the most part, they've done it. But at some point, there'll be a major breakthrough. They've already had many of these ransom attacks where they break into the hospitals, have all the records, and say, give me $1 million or they're gone, and they end up paying them. So everybody's taking precautions there. So they're saying that would happen. Also, along with that, we've seen the kind of upheaval one virus can bring. We've all lived through the COVID virus, coronavirus, whichever you want to call it. And they're saying there are enough evil, wicked people out there in the world now that are in labs that can make stuff that if it's released, it would be like what we will study later. I'll do my chart here in a second, but when we get to talking about what's going to happen on this earth after we're gone with these pandemics, plagues, famines, we can just see the precursors, I'll say, of this coming. Now, the good news is, I want to keep emphasizing this, we're not going to be here, okay? It's going to keep getting worse, but at least the worst of the worst, we're raptured out, and then all this takes place. But just look at all the signs that show us it's coming at some point. So let me get my whiteboard, and I'll give Betty credit for that. I had my, where is my little board? This is what I was going to use and come back and do. And so, this helps quite a bit. So let's go back and review. If you need your paper, have that out and look at it. If you've got it memorized, all the better. So with this, I'll let you help me through. How many chapters in Revelation? 22. So it divides easily out into sections. And before we do that, what is the key verse in Revelation? I gave you one verse in chapter 1 that summarizes the book of Revelation. Anybody remember that one? Say 19, John.
19.
That's it. Very good, John. Very good. Somebody have their Bible open and would like to read that for us?
119?
Yes. Chapter 1, verse 19 is the summary of the entire book of Revelation.
I'm on 4. Hang on. There we go. Write the things which thou hast seen.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 1, verse.
Write the things which thou hast seen, and the things which are, and the things which shall be hereafter.
Okay. Just 3 easy, quick divisions. The Lord came to John and say, write about the things that you have seen. This is past. Write about the things that are. That's present. And then the bulk of the book of Revelation has the last part, the things that are to come or will come, the future. Now let's divide that out and show how it works. Okay, for the past, we have which chapter on that? The things that are in the past.
Chapter 1.
Chapter 1, and under that we'll have the prologue. And then John had a great vision of what it was going about Jesus. All that's in chapter 1. That's the past. Then we'll move to the present. And which chapters cover the present?
2 and 3.
2 and 3. And we covered that last week. These are the 7 churches. Remember, I used the term mini epistles, just short, very short segments, 8, 10, 12 verses, where Paul would send large letters to churches at Colossae, Thessalonica, Galatians, on like that. Now, Ephesians is also one of the churches here. It's one of the few. It gets a short section, but Paul also wrote the longer book to Ephesus, or the church at Ephesus. So here we would call these the mini epistles. Oops. And then finally we get to the future, which is the largest block. And that would be chapters 4 all the way out to 22. And with that, what event takes place right here, right in chapter 4? What's going to happen? The big event. Rapture. Or the way I'm going to teach it.
Revelation chapter 4.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But we're raptured out at the whenever that happens, then all of this kicks off. And then from there, we have 4, and then 4 and 5 will be, we're talking about heaven. That's what we'll start with today. And then 6 through 18, we've got all kind of events happening. I won't even try to get into all those now. I'll just mention the 3 sevens, the 7 seals, the 7 bowls, the 7 trumpets. All happen through here. All the bad things are happening. And halfway through, it's 7 years all the way across on this. The first half for Israel is good. We'll be talking about this. The change and the focus now will be on Israel. when we start with chapter 4 forward. Up until here, we've had the church, 1 through 3. But remember one other thing I told you, starting in chapter 4, all the way out to here, the word church is not mentioned anymore. It means we're raptured out, we're gone. But this is a time for Israel, the regathering of Israel. And for these 7 years, the first, or all the 7 years are bad for whoever's left, except the first 3.5 for Israel are good. This demon-possessed Antichrist is making it look like he's on Israel's side. But then halfway through, he turns, the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde analogy, and then he vents all of his wrath, and all of this comes out on Israel the last 3.5 years. That's where we'll get into the 3 sevens again. And then from here, we have the return. Oops, if I can get this. Return of Christ. And then we'll have the judge, or millennium. You look on your sheets. This one, the millennium. Milli means 1,000. Annum, millennium, 1,000 years of Christ ruling on earth. And then with that, we also have the judgment. I'm going to put G-W-T here, Great White Throne Judgment, where all those that are left are judged. And again, the judgment here is on those that are not Christians. They're shown very visibly, all the sin in their life, and they can't say anything because their sin is exposed, and then they are cast into the lake of fire. I'll cover that in just, I'll go back to it. The Bema seat of Christ, or the judgment, if you want to use that for us, will probably happen right after the rapture. And that's simply a time where Christ is rewarding us for our faithfulness to Him. Our judgment, if I can put it in quotes like that, is the Bema seat of Christ, which will be back here. I'll hand that out and point it out on the handout that I have. And we all have been given gifts and talents. We've had opportunities to be faithful to the Lord, and we will be rewarded according to our faithfulness to Him. And as I was thinking about that, I think about some of these folks that, they just seem like, man, they do a whole lot more than I do. I can't even get close to what they do. And I brought one book by a guy here. Y'all may know about David Jeremiah. He's been pastor out in California for, 50 years probably, and has written over 30 books. Has not just a national TV program, worldwide TV program. Writes about things, popular speaker, goes all across the country. I don't even get close to that. Well, God's gifted him to do that. If God had gifted me to do that, I'd probably be doing the same thing. But my gifting is different. Your gifting is different. All God is asking of us is to use the talents and gifts that He's given us to His glory. And so we'll have back here, there'll be the Bema seat, we call it. And again, that's not something we fear. It's not whether we're a Christian or not a Christian, or, Jesus is mad at us. It's just whatever you've done in a good way, you'll be rewarded for and recognized. So hopefully what drives that is our love for Him. I would hope that all of us would want to be faithful unto death, faithful until He takes us home, to live a life that reflects the life within us. If we believe what we say, we have the life of Christ indwelling us, and we should let Him control our lives and be a reflection of His life out in the world. And then after the great white throne judgment here, we'll have 21 and 22, which is the new heaven and the new earth. So that is a quick overview of where we are. As here is very similar to this one. It's just it's in a linear model here. It's just all the way across. And so that may help you even more. You'll find the same information on the first sheet I gave you on this one. So just let me quickly walk us through that. We see the church, what we call the church age, is chapters 1 through 3. And the church age is defined as when Jesus left and Pentecost and the church began then, the first followers of Christ, back in the book of Acts. And it goes all the way up until the time we're raptured out. We call that the church age. Even though it's a small segment here, you can see it's already gone on for 2,000 years. And so when we say church age, that's a huge span of time. And then right after that, to show the end of the church age, we would have that line up where I drew it on the other one called the rapture. And then 4 and 5 is what will be, I'm leading up to that today, the huge celebration in heaven. What one author has said is of the two chapters that most tell us are the two chapters that help us understand praise and worship more than any other two chapters in the Bible are Revelation 4 and 5. Those are the two mountaintop chapters in the Bible about praise and worship. And then you can see here you have 6 through 11. And then you will have here the satanic trinity emerges, and then the abomination of desolation. And that's the wicked man, the Antichrist, reveals himself then. This is the first 3.5 years on the left, and then the last 3.5 years on the right. And then Christ return, you can draw a big arrow down right here. You have Christ returning. And then, as I've already said, millennium, great white judgment, and then the new heaven and the new earth. So I hope these charts are helpful to you. As I said, when we finally finish and wrap everything up, there are a lot more details than this that we'll talk about. But if you've got this down, if you could close your eyes and walk yourself through chapters 1 through 22 using this chart, I'm going to cover with this teaching I'm sharing with you. We'll talk quite a bit about the rapture, and you may have friends that have a different view on that, or they say, well, where is that in the Bible? Well, you know, it's kind of like asking somebody to show you, where's Trinity in the Bible? Show me the word Trinity. Well, it's not there. You won't find the word Trinity, but I can take you to several passages that obviously teach that we serve a triune God, but the word Trinity is not there. But it doesn't mean it's not true.
The word Bible.
Well, yeah, you could use that.
Bible's not in the Bible.
Bible's not in the Bible? Well, I don't know about that one. That'd be interesting. Use the Bible in the Bible. But the same with rapture. And so one key verse on this, there are other verses I'll cover in just a second, would be 1 Thessalonians 4. We've read it several times. I just want to read it to you again to emphasize this point, because we talk about it so much. It's just one set of verses that you'll need to know. So 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. For the Lord himself, and verse 16, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, and the voice of the archangel, that would be Gabriel, with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first, like milliseconds before we do. They go first, up in the air. And then we, if we're still alive, doesn't matter if we're in the ground or alive, we're all going up. The Bible is just indicating those that have preceded us in death will rise first, and we're right behind them, shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and then we shall always be with the Lord. And so this word, caught up together, we are going up, caught up with Him in the clouds. This is a very different event than when Jesus returns. Let me go back to my chart again. On this one. Here we have the rapture. We're going up to be caught up in the clouds with Him. And then another part of the second coming, or the return of Jesus to come down to earth, and physically He touches first on the Mount of Olives, and we come back with Him. Here with the rapture, we go up to Him, and rapture, we come back with Him to rule and reign during the millennium. So 2 events on the second coming, the rapture and the return. Reiterating again what I've said numerous times from chapter 4 onward, no mention of the church. And there is what one author has said, rapture language is used in verse 4 of Revelation. So let me read that verse for you and emphasize some words. And after these things I looked up and beheld a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard, like the sound of a trumpet. Remember what we just read in 1 Thessalonians? There will be a trumpet sound. Very similar wording here. The sound of a trumpet speaking with me, saying, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after these things." So it's almost as if Jesus is addressing, come up here, and then I'll show you these other things that will be happening. We will be looking from above from all the events that take place from chapter 4 onward. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way up to 22. Thessalonians 2 and verse 7. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work, and only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. And the he, most commentators would say, is the Holy Spirit of God. And so He within us, all of us, if we're born again, have the Holy Spirit residing within us, and God uses us. What people see is our faces, our bodies, our flesh, but it's really the Spirit of God within us that's using us, prompting us to do things to restrain evil. As much as we can, we vote in ways that put some barriers up to prevent evil from progressing. Admittedly, it seems like there are more of the opposing side than there are of our side. And again, one of the signs that we're in the end ages, our last times. But while we're here on earth, we have a part. I'll just go ahead and put a plug in for you need to be an active citizen. We've lived in most of the places we've lived, people, we can say they vote, but they don't. Most people don't vote because they already know what the election results are going to be. That was the joke in Azerbaijan. It's, we don't need to vote. We know who the president will be. And so it's always the same guy over and over. It was just what percentage would he win by that year. And it was always, interestingly enough, it was always in the 90 percentile. And one of my friends would look at me and go, John, we have a lot, or Steve, Steve, we have a lot better democracy than you have. Most of your presidential elections, it's 51%, 52, 55 at most percent, and that person wins. In my country, we have at least 90%. of the votes go for this one person. And, you know, big smile on his face because just a handful of people vote. Anyway, all that saying, I don't know how I got off on that one. The Holy Spirit within us, he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. So, again, many commentators, I agree with that. Once we are raptured out, there is no restraint. God just turns people over to their own desires. There is no good spirit left here, no Holy Spirit left to work through us to in some way try to restrain the evil and wickedness that's about to come. So people want to do what they want to do, they can do what they want to do. The restraint is gone. And then I'll share with you, this is what Robert Morgan, one of the guys I read when I'm studying for teaching, came across an insight I hadn't thought about before, and he shared it, and I thought, well, this is one that I think would be interesting. And he started out saying, it's as if you read the book of Revelation and you have to have a split screen thinking. We're talking about earth, we're talking about heaven. And then he went through and just showed how Revelation was that way. So when we start out, we're starting out here on earth. Does anybody remember the island that John was on when he wrote chapter 1?
Patmos.
Patmos. So we're here on earth at Patmos. And then we're transferred up into heaven for the vision. And then we come back down from heaven. And what for the next part are we doing for the, who did he write the letters to? Churches, the 7 churches here on earth. This line will be all the places mentioned on earth, and up here we'll be talking about heaven. So he wrote that on earth. That takes us through chapter 3. And then what happens in chapter 4? Where's the place? 4 and 5. Yeah, the rapture happens, and we go up to heaven. And then 4 and 5, we're writing about worship, the heavenly worship that takes place in 4 and 5. And then after that, when 5 concludes, then we come back down to, this will be chapter 6 onward. This is where all of the punishment takes place, where God's wrath is poured out on people who hate Him and don't want to obey Him. And then after that, we're taken back up. Let's see if I've got this right. So we have that out through here, and then we go back up again after this. Well, this actually, I'm going to have to put this right here. I'll put 20 right here, because there'll be the millennium. If you look on your chart, millennium, judgment, and then we go back up, and then we'll have the new heaven, and also the new earth, where it will be remade. And so his point was perspective on what's happening. For the people in heaven looking down, they are joyous and happy. They're in heaven. They're praising God. There's worship going on. But shortly thereafter, there's going to be the most horrendous events ever taking place down here on earth. And that's the earthly perspective. And then you have a new heaven and a new earth. Here we're on Patmos, where he's writing, up in heaven, down to the 7 churches, heaven. And you have to look at it with perspective. What perspective do you see all these events coming from? And those in heaven see it one way, those on earth see it another way. And he shared an illustration that I was thinking back and trying to remember. Well, I didn't know that was the first time this took place. But I said, yeah, I remember that. But all of us are old enough, and hopefully we tuned in. Do you remember, or did y'all tune in and watch the inauguration of Ronald Reagan?
I was old enough to remember that.
Were you old enough? All right. So on TV, for the first time, they showed a split screen. 2 different perspectives were going on at that time. You have the inauguration on this side of the screen of Ronald Reagan. Do you solemnly swear to uphold the Constitution? Da, 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 da. He's had his hand on the Bible. Everybody's watching. I solemnly swear. If only Ronald Reagan could say it. Okay, that's what we were seeing. That's our perspective of what's happening in the world right now. That was a major event. I mean, if there was a conservative Republican in our lifetime, he's it, you know. He's the guy that kind of changed the course. But what was happening 8,000 miles to the east in a country of Iran? What was happening at that exact moment? Does anybody remember? Anything about 53 Americans in an airplane?
The hostages.
Hostages? At that moment, just to gig Jimmy Carter, because they could have let him out earlier, but they really wanted to hammer Carter because he tried to rescue the hostages. At that point, they were being released. And I'll guarantee you for them, their focus was on that airplane taking off. And yes, was this split screen over here important? But for those people that had been through horrible circumstances, well, I guess I can use that word, it's in the Bible, they'd been through bad, you know, it had been bad for them, for those, whatever it was, I forget the number of days now, 306 a year, because that's when Nightline came into existence. Every night, 10:30, you could watch Ted Koppel and get the update on what was happening. For them, their focus, their perspective was that airplane in front of them, and just, God, please let it take off. Please let us get out of the airspace. And so that's what Robert Morgan was saying. So many times in life, we are in hard, tough situations, and we're viewing it from our earthly perspective. And we need to, as we mature and grow in Christ, begin looking from a different perspective, as if there's a split screen. Yes, we are experiencing bad things. Don't be Pollyanna. Oh, everything's great. Oh, yeah, fine. Oh, yeah, yes, be positive. No negativity. Blah, blah, blah. You know, that's not healthy. It's not right. But you begin to view circumstances from the view of God, from a different perspective. So he was saying we need to learn to live with a split screen living, if you want to say that. And he gave several verses on that. If we could apply this, because you've got really what's happening on earth down here, and that's the perspective of the people living here. And then you have heavenly events taking place where people are joyful and happy and rejoicing. Well, that's their perspective. That's where they are. And so we always have to remember that life can get hard, but it's through the hardship that God can bring about maturity in our faith and grow us as Christians. And let me read several verses there that are mentioned. Isaiah 55, verse 8, one that probably all of us know. And I just wasn't confident I could remember to quote it, so I'm going to read it. Isaiah 55, verse, I'll just read a section of it, 8 through 13, and then come back and emphasize the part that I want. And God's talking to Isaiah. He says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts your thoughts. And as the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return without watering the earth, and make it bear and sprout, and furnishing seed to the sower and eater, so shall my word, which goes forth from my mouth, it will not return empty, without accomplishing what I desire, and without succeeding in the matter for which I sent it. And so if you'll notice that one verse, and he made reference to that for as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways. And it's just comforting to know that God put that in His Word for us to read and get perspective on life. And that's the one thing, in order for us to keep perspective, is to go to His Word. For in verse 11 it says, for my word which goes out from my mouth, it won't return empty, without accomplishing what I desire, without succeeding in the matter for which I sent it. And then just a few verses that we all need to memorize, and these verses help us get the true perspective of life, is Romans 8:28. For all things work together for good to those that love Him, and are called according to His purpose. And so we need to remember it is the all things. The good things as we deem good, the bad things as we deem bad, and God has a way of mixing and working all that together for our good. Ephesians 1:5, that as long as we're on this earth, that He, God, will work out the pleasure of His will in our lives. God is sovereign. And again, that gets into that mystery that I can't explain it. I know it's true, and if you try to explain it, you end up sometimes tying yourself in knots, but it's just true. We do have free will. We can make choices. But in the midst of all that, you remember God is sovereign, and He works it all out for our good, and that it will be to His pleasure that He works things out in our lives. And then James 1, this is the attitude that we ought to have when we face the hard circumstances. Count it all joy. Not if you face hard times, when you have trials. It's just the assumption that you're going to have hard times if you're on this earth. There's no immunity. You can't take a biblical vaccine. I used to think, well, if I just read my Bible enough, memorized enough verses, went to church enough in a year, that would create some kind of little bubble over me, and I wouldn't have to go through all the hardship that some people go through. Well, no. Hardship is a part of the maturing process. And is it hard? Yes. Emotionally, do we cry? Yes. Is it painful? Yes. But I think all of us can say it's been through hard times in life that we've sought Him more. I know it's true in my life. And so the end result of this hardship was that I got closer to God. But I'm human as the rest of you, and it's like one preacher I heard says, yeah, we all want to be like Jesus. We just don't want to go to the school of suffering that it takes to be like Jesus. We want the results without getting the degree. And you're going to have to go through some hardship courses that are a part of life. If you going through college, you got certain courses you got to take to get that bachelor's degree. And if you're going to be like Jesus, you're going to have some good courses you enjoy taking, and you're going to have some courses you don't like. Well, suffering is one of those courses. And so trying to get perspective in all of this sometimes really, really helps when you see suffering in a different light. We're human, yes, but if you can somehow elevate yourself and look at it from a heavenly perspective, that God uses all things to make us and conform us into Christ's image. And I think with that, I have successfully had a 30-minute introduction. So, next week we will do 4 and 5. And that sets the stage for 2 of the most wonderful chapters in the Bible. I would hope that many of us have read these multiple times, but when you get a vision as to what this worship service is going to be like in heaven, it's like a worship service you've never known. I've been a part of many wonderful worship services in various times and places, whether it be in a church building, whether I've been out by myself. One of the most wonderful worship experiences I've ever had in life. I want to say and I may come back and tell you that later, but for sure, one of the most wonderful times I've ever had in worship and praise was when I was in the room when my father passed away. And he's like, "What? Your dad passed away?" At that moment, I wasn't sad. It was like God overwhelmed me with verses like this, that it's His time. God has ordained the number of days that we'll be on this earth. And all of us want to live healthy, happy lives with no medical problems and read our Bible at night and go to sleep and wake up in heaven. Well, you know, it just doesn't work out that way. Life is hard. There are problems in life. And so, as I was thinking about that, the earthly perspective would be just weeping and crying and, oh God, my dad is dead, oh God. Okay, and humanly, that's okay. And did I have a time not like that, because I thankfully had matured in my faith enough to where I knew he would have a day where he'd pass away. And just by God's providence, because actually, I won't go through the whole story, but my 3 brothers and I were just going to spend days with him in his latter days, and he was expected to live about another week or so, maybe 2 weeks, what hospice said. And so they transferred him. He was getting there at 6. My middle brother was coming at 9 just to spend the night with him, be with him. And I just said, well, I'm free, I'm not working. I just don't want him to be in a room, you know, it's going to be a change, be a difference. I just want him to have one familiar face. And my other brother, youngest brother, already had plans for that evening. So I said, all right, Mike, I'll be there at 6 when he comes, after they transport him to the hospice center, and you come at 9 and I'll go home. Well, I think it was during that time, he'd fought the race, he'd fought the fight. And he just said, I guess figured out, well, this isn't where I was, and I guess this is hospice. I have no idea what was in his mind, but you know, he got there and said, well, I'm ready to go. And so we literally had an hour. I got there at 6 and spent a little bit of time with the nurses, just talking with them and letting them know I appreciated the time that they were going to spend with my dad. And they said, well, why don't you walk on in and just spend some time. And I did, and I noticed his mask was to the side. So they came in, and she came in and kind of shot and put it back over his mouth, and then began checking his pulse and just other things. And said, I'm going to leave you alone. I think he's passing. And so I thought, wow. And so I just sat there, reaffirmed my love to him, told him verbally. I've always heard the last of your senses to go is the hearing. You know, it's not your eyesight. not your taste, all that's pretty much gone, but people can still hear. So I reaffirmed my love to him, and then just went back and sat. And she came in 7-11. Remember that because of the store. Funny way to remember the time, but that's the way I remember. It was 7-11 stores, and checked his pulse, and he'd passed away. He said, I'm going to record the time of death, 7-11. I said, well, thank you. And said, I'm going to slip out. And she did. And then for that next 30 to 45 minutes, I can say I've never sensed the presence of the Lord as I did then. And yet, on earth, my dad had died. From the perspective of worship, it was a glorious time for me. And I don't know if I'm explaining the words to where you can catch what I'm trying to say, but it was all about perspective. Because I'd call my brothers, told them, I said, Dad's passing away. If y'all want to be here one more time, you need to come now. And they both were getting in their cars to come. And just with traffic, 6 o'clock, in Nashville, traffic's not the best time to try and get somewhere. So they finally got there about 7:30, I think. But during that time, I just sat, sang songs that I knew, cried, thankful that there was hope for me. I knew where he was, and that I'd get to see him again.
Yes.
So all of that working together, I'm just saying God granted me the privilege in a very difficult set of circumstances, very hard set of circumstances, not to have an earthly perspective, but to have a heavenly perspective. And so I leave that with you as an application, because once we get through the heavenly perspective in Revelation 4 and 5, we're going to dip down for the next 12 chapters from 6 to 18, and you're going to see an earthly perspective like you've never seen before of what all is going to take place on this earth. So with that, I close and just say, if you're going through a hard time, get in the Word. My ways are not your ways. Let God do His work and what He's doing. And remember, His Word will not come back void. It serves the intended purpose for which He wanted, and the Word is to encourage us, to help us, to minister to us, and then when necessary, correct us. But during your times of being down, get in the Word and let the Word lift you up. Get a heavenly perspective. Okay, with that, I'll wrap up. Any questions? Okay, next week I promise we will finish 4 and 5. I'll read through it with a few comments as we go. Thank you all for coming.